Okay, right, remember we've got to chapter 7. They've got to the this and that shop, and we believe that Dish is in the this and that shop. But everyone's been a bit cagey, so they haven't found out too much information because Gazillion's there. Remember, they've seen Gazillion, and they've seen Flabbergast auntie. I can't actually remember her name. What was it? Oh my days. Ophelia. There we go. So they've got to be careful. They don't want to bump into Ophelia. In fact, they've just spent the last couple of minutes hiding from her in like the Chamber Pot Alley, which sounds like, you know, Portaloos. That's where they used to went to the toilet. Flabbergast had to go to the toilet, didn't he? He'd had so much tea from all the tea in the realms. Right, chapter 7. A little purple lizard perched on a shelf above the door and croaked an alert as they entered the shop. So that's almost like caving in those shops where there's a bell on the top. Ding ding! But obviously because it's witches and wizards, there's a little purple lizard. Again, that's a nice image. If you're drawing, you could draw the doors open ajar, and they're all being pushed in, and on the top, a little purple lizard wagging his tail. Ding ding! Flabbergast hurriedly closed the door behind them and peered anxiously out of the window. But Nine was more interested in what was inside. Wobbly stacks of anything and everything were piled high everywhere. On the floor, on overloaded bending shelves, in large baskets that dangled from the ceiling. It was like the nest of 1,000 treasures, the thiefling's den she had grown up in before she'd found the house, but magnified by 1,000,000 times. The old gangmaster Pockets would have loved collecting special treasures and knickknacks like these. Old Toby jugs, broken lockets, curious ornaments. She wondered what he would make of this shop. Behind her, Eric was trying to shuffle her on, but she could hardly move forwards. She was surrounded by this and that. At the very back of the shop, she spotted a counter with just a visible doorway behind it, covered with a curtain of vertical strips of material, all of which were sparkling and twinkling. "Oh, no time for this," growled Spoon, stabbing his sword pointedly into an unsuspecting inflatable pumpkin beside the door. There was a small hiss of air from the pumpkin. "Where's Dish?" Nine moved forwards, stepping over, ducking beneath a clatter of skeleton marionettes that dangled unnervingly from a chandelier. "This whole place looks like your cupboard under the stairs," she said to Flabbergast. "Yes, well, purchases always seemed like a good idea at the time." Nine noticed the statue of a cat sitting on the top of a pile of tea cosies, staring at her with sinister, pale green eyes. She leaned in closer. "And what do you think you're staring at?" Bang! The purple lizard croaked again as the door flew open, bashing Flabbergast on the nose and knocking off his hat. But no one and nothing came through the door. Suddenly, there was that feeling again, that feeling of being watched. Nine looked back at the cat statue and she froze. The eyes were now looking in a different direction, just over Nine's shoulder. She spun round, still no one there. "Welcome," said a wizard, slipping silently through the sparkling strips at the back of the shop and standing behind the polished wooden counter. He had a short, dark hair streaked with grey and a short, pointy black beard hat. He wore a bright red cloak with orange stripes that made Nine's eyes ache a little. "Alfwyn, dutifully at your service," he said, smiling widely and rubbing his hands together. His gaze lingered on Spoon for a moment, and the smallest of smiles then crept across his face. Then his attention snapped back to Nine and the others. "What can I interest you in with today? A bath for your frog?" He reached inside his cloak and pulled out a small lily pad-shaped dish. "Almost watertight." "No," said Flabbergast. He pulled his hat back and stumbled towards them across the cluttered floor. "Top quality weather vane. Fell off the back of a house, if you know what I mean. Great condition, though. Works a treat, see?" He whisked out a weather vane in the shape of a dragon and blew on it to make it spin. It didn't move an inch. No, said Spoon as Alfwyn's puffed cheeks turned red with effort. That cat statue from the mortal world can offer you a discount for that one today. Only from my world. What's it doing here then? Murmured Nine and looked again at the cat. Oh, you'd be surprised the things that would pass from world to world, said Alfwyn. Tell you what, 10% off the cat just for you. No, said Nine. There must be something that takes your interest, gasped a little red-cheeked Alfwyn, feebly holding up a little corked jar. Repelling song? Great for warding off the green horde minotaurs. His face fixed into a grimace as he unlocked the jar. A high-pitched, ear-splitting wailing song burst out before Alfwyn hastily slammed the cork back in. A huge improvement A huge improvement on your singing, lad, muttered Spoon. Flabbergast cleared his throat, plonked a yonder on the counter, and grabbed the jar. May come in handy should they attack again, he muttered. Then he leaned forwards. I don't suppose you might have anything that might give one's magic a little more zap if it happened to have completely vanished? I'm a dealer, said Alfwyn, not a miracle worker. Flabbergast sighed. There is something that takes our interest, said Nine in a low but firm voice. Your basement. The wizard narrowed his eyes and threw the frog bath and the weather vane over his shoulder, where they shot through the curtain strips and landed with a slight crash. He looked shiftily left and right and twitched his moustache. He lowered his voice to barely a whisper. The basement, eh? What's it worth? Not getting stabbed, said Spoon, leaping up onto the wizard's shoulder and pointing his shiny new sword at Alfwyn's throat. But a glint in the wizard's eye made Nine's heart skip a beat. There was a crackle of crimson, and Spoon went flying off the wizard's shoulder and landed in the basket full of more little purple lizards that was dangling from the ceiling. How dare you, roared Spoon, brushing a long scaly tail from the top of his head. One of the lizards licked his face, leaving a trail of saliva behind. Spoon swished his sword around again, first at the offending lizard, and then back in Alfwyn's direction once more. Dr. Spoon, kindly refrain, said Flabbergast. As Eric trundled over to the basket, raising his huge hand so that Spoon could clamber down onto him, Flabbergast turned to Alfwyn, the indubitable, and smiled falsely. Now I am sure we could come to some arrangement. I'm sure we can, said Alfwyn, his eyes glinting again, always willing to trade at this for that. What you got? He nodded at Nine. What you got in your satchel, mortal? Nothing for you, Nine said, placing her arms protectively over the bag. A sense of panic filled her when she thought of her music box. But there was another flash of crimson, and a force sent the flap of her satchel flying open. Strands of magic twisted out from the fingertips of Alfwyn's left hand and shot inside the bag, rooting around. Stop that, cried Nine, but she was powerless against the magic. Anger crackled through her veins as she watched the crimson strands bring out the candle, her precious music box, the purse from Flabbergast, and the little velvet pouch she had pickpocketed from the witch at the Hopscotch Championship. The strands released the objects on the counter with a clatter, then disappeared back into Alfwyn's fingertips. Madam, said Flabbergast in a low voice, I suggest you remain calm. I am calm, Nine bellowed, glaring at Alfwyn. Lady not, said Eric beside her, wringing his tail. Just let me examine the objects, madam, because I have so much choice about that. And we can come to an arrangement, finished Flabbergast. He smiled coldly at Alfwyn, but Nine could see his nostrils flaring and his magicless fingertips twitching. She could almost feel his frustration at being powerless. A powerless wizard. After 3 years of being under the curse, when he had been unable to use his magic, he had now lost it completely. Alas, said Spoon in a low voice, clambering onto her shoulder. I'm fine, said Nine as she hardened her face into a scowl. She watched Alfred examine each object. She bit her lip as he held the candle close to his face, praying, just praying that the flame didn't suddenly blow a raspberry, then breathed a sigh of relief as he simply sent it back to Nine's satchel with another crimson thread. Next, he brought the music box closer to his face, with a disappointed tut, before jiggling Flabbergast's purse, causing a jangling sound. Just yonders, muttered Alfred. I need something a little bit special like. Finally, he picked up the little pickpocketed velvet pouch and tipped the contents upside down onto the counter. 4 coins and a tiny cork jar with a sapphire blue smoke swirling inside. Alfwyn's eyes lit up as he picked up the jar. Madam, hissed Flabbergast, turning to Nine with wide eyes. Wherever did you get that? Alfwyn smirked. A pretty sight and no mistake. Not often you come across a jar of cloud smoke. Cloud smoke, said Nine, staring at the jar. Allow me to demonstrate, Alfwyn said smoothly. He carefully lifted the minuscule cork lid, the merest fraction revealing the smallest gap, and a giant whooshing cloud of sapphire smoke hurtled angrily out, billowing out into the shop and filling every corner. Nine was instantly swallowed up in thick, seething, airless blue, unable to see, panic rising inside her. There was a rush of movement behind her, and sapphire smoke seemed to zoom past at an alarming rate, until her vision returned and she saw the vast cloud shrink as it was sucked back into the crack between the cork and the jar. The last wisp of the smoke zoomed in and Alfwyn pushed the cork down. Silently and innocently, the smoke swirled lazily around the inside the tiny bottle. Alfwyn looked like he was thinking hard, then he looked at Nine. Come in handy, that, with the kind of folk I do business with, he nodded. I'll take the jar in return for a trip to the basement. You're welcome to it, Deal, said Nine. Deal, said Alfwyn. At high speed, the crimson strands thrust the other items back into Nine's satchel and dropped the flap shut. Then the magic retracted into his fingertips. Lady fine? Asked Eric, putting his rough hand on her shoulder. Lady's always fine, said Nine. She glared at Alfwyn, the indubitably dutiful for good measure. The wizard smiled a creepy smile. Follow me. He beckoned to them and passed through the curtain of sparkling strips. Nine, Flabbergast, Eric and Spoon exchanged uncertain glances. Right, muttered Nine. Let's find ourselves a dish. She led the others behind the counter, following the wizard through the curtain, trying hard to shake the feeling that something else was following them. See, she's got that feeling. And your feelings are normally intuitive and correct. That takes us to chapter 8.